Are we ready? Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining our virtual town hall this evening. My name is Ann Williams, in District in Chicago, which includes the Chicago neighborhoods of West Lakeview, Lincoln Park, parts of Lincoln Square, North Center, Roscoe Village, etc. So, you know, I prefer to be talking to you live, but since I'm in Springfield, for the last couple weeks, I hope, of the legislative session, I wanted to at least provide an update from Springfield. Of course, you're always welcome to email me directly at Ann, A-N-N, at repannwilliams.com, or give our office a call, 773-880-9082. So if you don't get your questions answered tonight, if you have comments, anything you'd like to share, please, as always, feel free to reach out. So thanks for participating. This is our first ever attempt to do a virtual town hall. I'm joined, who you can't see, by my Chief of Staff and IT Coordinator and Technology Expert, Colleen Smith. So hopefully between the two of us and the webcam, this turns out in a way that's helpful to you. So just quickly to go through the agenda, we're first going to do a quick overview of the state budget as well as touch on Chicago Public School budget issues. And then we will have a brief guest appearance by Colleen Daly, who is the Executive Director of the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. And she will be providing us a late-breaking news update on an important bill that passed in committee. So after I do that, and after we hear from Colleen, we will go to some previously submitted questions, and then we will go to live questions. So to submit a live question, please enter a comment along with your name, and the first name is fine, in the comment section, or else you can click Ask a Question. So let's get started. Obviously, the 800-pound gorilla, the elephant in the room, is the Illinois state budget, which we are now several months into not having a state budget for fiscal year 16. Of course, if you've been following this issue, you know that there is an exception. Please enter a comment along. We did pass, and the governor signed, the K through 12 budget, so that enabled schools to open on time this past year. But just because there's no budget doesn't mean that money is not going out and money is not coming in. In fact, and this is a surprising fact for many people, 90% of the state's budget is actually being spent even without an actual budget. And this happens kind of in three ways. First, in the first category is continuing appropriations. And that is money that goes out automatically for things like pension payments, debt service, etc. Second are payments made under consent decrees. And this primarily impacts Medicaid payments. Sometimes recently, sometimes years ago, groups would go to court, and courts would then order the state to into a consent decree, and then money would go out to fund those programs. So Medicaid is the largest example there. Finally, court orders directly can provide for the state to expend money even in the absence of a budget. And that would be, you may have heard about the governor went into court to request that state employees continue to be paid even in the absence of a budget. So because of that, we continue to pay state employees. So those are the three categories that make up the 90%. However, 10% of the budget is not being paid, and that's what you're hearing so much about the news. You're hearing about human service programs that are being cut, that are being devastated by the lack of budget money or budget funds. In addition, higher education is a huge problem. Many of our state schools are suffering drastic cuts. More about that to come. In terms of where we go from here, I think the majority of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and even the governor himself, have said any solution is going to come from a mix of both making cuts and looking at other opportunities for revenue. On the revenue side, you probably have heard there was a proposal to provide for a fair tax, also known as a graduated tax, and this is similar to what the majority of our surrounding states do, as well as the federal government, of course. And so those who make more money would pay a higher percentage than those who are at the lower income levels. That has not advanced to date. Another item you may have heard about is called the millionaire's tax, and that is more or less a way of providing for a similar graduated income tax structure. And finally, you may be aware that 2 years ago, the temporary income tax that was passed several years ago, before I was in office, was rolled back. And so the state is now has substantially less revenue because of that rollback. Many of our surrounding states actually utilize a mix of taxes that we don't utilize in Illinois. Taxes on services, for example. Many states, we're in the minority here, tax retirement income as well, and that's not something we do here in Illinois. In fact, when you look at the statistics, if we taxed similarly to states like Indiana and Wisconsin, we'd actually bring in a lot more revenue. So a lot of our fiscal difficulty stems from how our taxes are structured. There is some good news on the budget front. There have been 2 items passed that contain somewhat of a stopgap funding opportunity in 2 areas. First, in the area of human services, we recently passed a bill that would provide for additional funding for limited human service programs. And these are things like rape crisis centers, the community care program, which allows seniors to stay in their homes, mental health funding, substance abuse issues, programs that were in danger of closing their doors or worse, maybe permanently if there wasn't some stopgap funding. Secondly, in the area of higher ed, we provided something like 40% of what they should have gotten for the year was provided in one of these so-called stopgap or bridge funding measures. The good news there is we helped a little bit. The bad news is it's little more than a Band-Aid for these programs, and we can't continue to operate without a full budget. Another positive item to report on these 2 measures is that Republicans and Democrats agreed on the issues and to move forward with a solution. So even though we need to do a lot more, we've at least made some limited progress. But I think it's important to note that the lack of a budget, a full budget in Illinois, is having very, very real and devastating impacts on the state. And those things range from, again, higher ed cuts that, once the programs are gone, once the faculty leave, there's no making up for that. Human service providers, again, once you lose the infrastructure, the staffing, it's very hard to recreate that. And those are the programs that impact the most vulnerable among us. And I would argue and often say that these sort of cuts and failing to invest in these programs is very, I think the term, penny wise, pound foolish. Yeah, because making the cuts now might save money in the short term. In the long term, you're going to spend much more, and it will cost us much more, both fiscally and in human terms. So you may have an opinion as to why we're dealing with this budget crisis. If you take the personalities out of it, which is difficult to do, I think we're looking at a basic disagreement as to how to proceed on budget issues. The governor is and continues to demand that we pass his turnaround agenda before we can even discuss the budget. This is a political agenda. However, some of the items within this agenda I actually agree with. Something like the redistricting reform, for example, is something that I strongly support and hope to work with the governor to advance. But regardless of what's in the package, it's not appropriate to tie the passage of a budget to a political agenda of any kind. Those issues can and should be discussed separately. The irony, I think, is that the instability that's been caused by the failure to pass a budget has caused more damage to our state and has deterred companies and economic development in our area, it puts us in a lose-lose situation. So I think it's fair to say this is a crisis. We're all aware that we're in crisis. It's just a matter of coming together and pushing to move us forward and out of crisis mode. I'm an optimist, and I'm hopeful that we can make that happen. And of course, we'll keep you updated as things progress in the next few weeks. On to, quickly, my second topic, and this is a topic I hear about most frequently from constituents, and that is the Chicago Public Schools. Clearly we are continually in crisis mode. Recently, more cuts were announced to public schools. Just before we walked into the room today, there was a news article that discussed cuts of extremely high percentages. I haven't verified that information. I'm working to get more information on that. But whatever's happening, and as this continues to happen year after year, it's clear this is unfair to the administrators, principals, the committed teachers, and obviously to the students. And we need to address CPS funding, and we need to provide stability for our schools. Neighborhood schools are the cornerstones of our community. I think we can all agree to that, and we need to do what it takes to make sure those schools thrive. You've heard probably a bit, if you're a CPS family, about the issue of equity. Let me kind of just explain a bit what you're hearing and what equity really exists. When it comes to general revenue, Chicago Public Schools do get a proportionate share of general revenue funds from the state. Certainly, this amount is extremely inadequate. But where the inequity comes in really is in how pensions are funded in Illinois. Way back in 1895, the Chicago teachers established a pension fund to provide for retirement for teachers. That's continues today. In the 30s, all the other school districts banded together to provide for retirement benefits for the teachers in the rest of the state. And that's the structure that continues today. The difference being that Chicago pensions are paid through taxpayer money, local property taxes. So Chicago taxpayers pay for their own teacher pensions, whereas the state pays for teacher pensions for the rest of the state. And for years and years and years, we went along. There was no issue with this. Both pension funds were funded strongly. Chicago Teachers Pension Fund was well funded until 1995, when a change in the law permitted the Chicago Public Schools in the city of Chicago to shortchange the pension funds for 10 years in a row, which was a good part of why we are in the crisis we are in today, among other factors. So now that we're in this position, the teacher pension fund's in jeopardy, we're struggling with finances at CPS, there's a move afoot to remedy this inequity. Obviously, this is something I would support. The political reality, though, is that's tough to do because the rest of the districts would then have to make up the slack, and politically that's difficult to accomplish. But I think for CPS, it requires a two-pronged approach. First, we need to find a short-term fix for the immediate cash crisis. I would suggest a partial solution is to take the TIF surplus and put it right into the schools. That's extra money. That's money that should be utilized for the emergency that CPS is in. That is in bill form here in Springfield. It is not supported by the city of Chicago, and it is not passed. Legislators from Chicago and otherwise continue to push for that as a short-term fix. Secondly is the longer-term revamp of a very inequitable school funding formula and a way to address the pension inequity. Currently, there's a proposal, Senate Bill 231, that would provide for a revamp of the school funding formula, relying less on property taxes. This would benefit schools like CPS, and in fact, the bill that's pending would provide for an additional $175 million in funding for CPS next year, which is certainly money we desperately need. This would redistribute education funding to address disparities and provide more money to low-income districts who don't have the property tax money to make up the slack. For those of you that don't know, CPS is approximately 85% low-income students, so we're substantially impacted by the inequities in the school formula. The bill is a work in progress. As you can imagine, if certain school districts win, others lose, and as a political reality, that makes passage difficult. I'm hopeful, though, that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and from all areas of the state will understand how important it is to stabilize the Chicago Public Schools, even if they're not from Chicago and they don't represent Chicago. I am concerned about the governor's proposal on school funding. He has proposed pouring additional money into the same inequitable system. What that would mean is a loss of, I think, $74 million from CPS. Anyone who is a CPS family has been following this issue understands this would create, untenable problems for CPS, and is not something we can allow to happen. So I think the governor feels a little punitive, actually, that he's looking at school funding this way. We need to find a way to stabilize schools in Chicago first and foremost, and provide for low-income districts throughout the state to get their fair share. That is my #1 priority here in Springfield, and the issue I hear most about from all of you. On the CPS front, you're probably familiar with a couple other items I'll just touch on briefly. They have both passed out of the House with my support. First is support for the elected school board, to provide for elected school board in the city of Chicago, and that awaits action in the Senate. And then there's, for those of you familiar with the PARC test, there's a bill to provide for parents to be able to opt their students out from the test. So those are a couple items that are both awaiting action in the Senate. So that's my a quick few. I'll just list a quick listing of other items that are pending that might be of interest to you. If you want more information on any of these items, I'm happy to provide it. It's available on the General Assembly website, and of course we'll give you more information if you email us on this. I'm sponsoring kind of an exciting bill about, it's actually Senate Bill 2343, and it deals with what's called a Stingray, and that is a cell site simulator, which is a powerful technology that allows law enforcement to gather phone data from people in a certain area. But as many new technologies arise, often the law is quite behind in terms of regulation of those items. So what my bill would do would provide restrictions on the use of those technologies and ensure that law enforcement complies with its constitutional mandates in terms of utilization of those technologies. So that's an exciting bill. It's got broad bipartisan support, and I'm hopeful we can move that this session. For those of you following environmental issues, I am chair of the Green Caucus, which is our legislative caucus focused on environmental concerns, and we continue to work on the Clean Jobs Initiative. And if you're familiar with that, you know that that's a bill sponsored by an array of companies, solar, wind companies, environmental organizations, advocacy groups, which would do a couple things. First, it would update the renewable portfolio standard, allowing us to utilize and pushing and incentivizing us to use more renewable energy sources. It would encourage energy efficiency, and we'd move away from our reliance on fossil fuels. So this is a big deal, but like everything else in Springfield, is taking a back seat to the budget issues. So something we continue to work on. We also have an important bill I've heard from many of you about, and that's House Bill 5576. And this improves access to birth control under certain insurance plans. And you'd really be surprised in 2016 how antiquated some of our laws are in terms of reproductive health care. So I'm working along with Planned Parenthood and other organizations to ensure that women have access to the birth control options that they need. On that note, I'm joined, as promised, by a very special guest who also happens to be a constituent and live in the 11th District. Her name is Colleen Daly. Colleen, come on in.
Thank you.
Colleen is the Executive Director of the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence, and she's going to update you on some news hot off the presses from Springfield.
Sure. Well, thanks, Ann, for having me.
Thank you.
And hello, everybody. As Ann mentioned, I'm Colleen Daly. I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. And we are an organization based here in Illinois working to stop the devastation caused by firearms. And one of the things that we've been pushing for this year is legislation that would license firearm dealers in the state of Illinois. The City of Chicago, in conjunction with the University of Chicago Crime Lab and Chicago Police Department, did a study, and what they found over a 4-year period of time, that 40% of guns used in crimes in Cook County actually come from Cook County. And that's something that was a little jarring to us. I mean, 60% comes from out of state, mainly Indiana and Mississippi. But the other 40% that's coming from here are from our gun dealers. And what we know is that 17% of guns used actually come from 3 local dealers, one in Riverdale, one in Lyons, and one in Lincolnwood. So what we decided to do is we need to stop the illegal trafficking of firearms onto our streets. We know these gun dealers are not doing the right thing. One gun dealer in a 4-year period of time had over 1,500 guns found in the streets of the city of Chicago. We think that's awful. They clearly are doing something wrong. And so what we've tried to do is license them. We think we're being very reasonable. The bill would do some very common sense things like make sure there's background checks on anyone who works at a gun dealership. In a gun dealer, I should say. There's transparency, that they're keeping accurate records, that local law enforcement can actually go and look at their books to make sure they're not selling guns to people who they shouldn't be selling them to make sure there's surveillance on their property, and also to videotape all gun sales. This way we can actually hold those people who are maybe a straw purchaser accountable, as well as if they shouldn't have made that sale to begin with, we'll actually have records to do that. We also want to put limitations where gun dealers can be. We don't want them close to schools. So the exciting news is today we were fortunate enough to get it out of the House Judiciary Criminal Law Committee on a vote, a party line vote unfortunately, but hopefully we'll see some Republicans come on board when we get it to the full House. So it's kind of exciting. We are going to be amending it with a few concerns that we had arise in committee today, but it's a great first step. As Ann knows and has talked about, you know, these things in Springfield take some time, but we believe that if we get this passed and we can cut off 40% of the supply of guns to our city, we're definitely going to see a decrease in crime. So,
well, thank you so much. So, Colleen, if someone's interested in getting more information, signing up for your email address, signing up for your newsletter, what can they do?
Easily go to our website, which is www.ichv.org. And there's easily you can sign on there. All of our phone numbers, all of our contact information is all on our website. So
great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming in this evening.
Have fun.
She's also my neighbor.
Yes, constituent too.
Yeah. Thanks, Colleen. So from that, I think we will go to some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time. And I hope this is working for you. I'm open to any and all feedback you might have on the virtual town hall. Of course, we'll be seeing you live and in person in June and throughout the summer and fall around the district, so we can have an interaction then as well. First question. I don't have a name associated with the question, but we've edited them for length. But thank you for those who sent them in. There's a few we have. What can parents do to address the crisis at CPS? How can we shine a light on this crisis and get our leaders to put together a real working plan? This is going to be similar to what we talked about earlier, but you know, I think this person hit on an important fact, and that is without collaboration, we are not going to move forward with the crisis at CPS. So that means even if you don't represent Chicago, even if you don't deal with Chicago Public Schools on a regular basis, it's critical that you get invested and look at Chicago as a broader part of our state. So what I'd say to parents is to please continue to stay engaged. I hear from all of you, or many of you, frequently on CPS issues. In fact, my phone was blowing up on the way into this meeting today about the recent news article that came up. And, you know, I didn't start out my career to address education issues, but very quickly realized that is one of the most important issues I address in counseling that we address on a daily basis, and the issue I hear from you most about. So I would say continue to stay engaged, talk to your friends and neighbors, other CPS parents, because even if you don't have kids in the Chicago Public School, these issues impact you greatly. So thank you for reaching out. Please continue to do so and make noise. Unfortunately, sometimes that's what it takes to get the attention of some of our political leaders. Okay, number 2, I think we've already addressed this. Due to a lack of fair funding, neighborhood schools in your district are facing 20% budget cuts for the 2016-2017 school year. What are immediate actions we can take to address this? I feel confident that we are going to be able to address this crisis, but we need, as I said, a collaborative solution. I would recommend the following steps. I think we first need to address the immediate cash crisis by passing a TIF surplus bill. There are some perspectives that say we could put that money into schools immediately without requiring legislation. I don't think it matters. We just need to get it done. There's extra money out there. It's a surplus. It's been taken from the schools through the TIF program. Let's put it back in the schools. That's what we need to do. It's the first step. We need to revamp the funding formula. There's some voices on the other side of the aisle that say that we'll call the school funding reform a Chicago bailout. That's unfair and inaccurate, and I would say that's punitive to say that Chicago public schools don't deserve to get their fair share. We need to revamp the funding formula in a way that benefits the schools that don't have the property tax revenues to make up the difference that's available in certain other areas. So that's a critical step to moving forward. And we've been talking about revamping school funding for years and years, but now that we're in a deep crisis mode, both on the state budget as a whole and on CPS, it's even more critical we make this happen. Finally, we need to be open to exploring revenue options. As I mentioned earlier, if our tax structure was similar to our surrounding states, the states that are often called out as being so pro-business and so positive in terms of their policies, states like Indiana and Wisconsin, we would be bringing in millions and millions of dollars in more revenue. So I think we need to put the politics aside and really explore options to improve the way we tax in Illinois and make sure that people are taxed in a fair way and that revenues go to the places we need it most, to education funding, to critical human services, and to pay our unpaid bills. Those are critical items. All right. Next question. Legislators have avoided tough votes on tax increases and reform that would help Illinois finances, and budgets have not been balanced in over a decade. Can you see why people really don't think anything will change without a new speaker? I get a lot of questions about the speaker, and I agree that it's become a bit of an issue about personality, and I think that has stood in the way of us focusing on the issues that we need to focus on. If you take the personality out of the equation, on the issues of budgeting, on the issues of revenue, we need to focus on the actual solutions that are going to move Illinois forward and quit looking at everything through a political lens. So while I would say yes, it is true, we haven't raised our state income tax since 1989. If you look, and depending on the source, it may the statistics may vary, but if you look at where Illinois ranks in terms of income tax, we're at the bottom in terms of rates for taxation of states. And again, we don't tax retirement income, we don't tax services, and I'm not suggesting we start a wholesale change in the revenue system that will add all these revenues, but I think it's important to put the facts into perspective when you're looking at these issues. I will note, and I'm going to pivot back to the governor here, we've always had a state budget. This is the first year we've been struggling like this, and I'm open and interested in hearing what the governor has to say about opportunities for economic development, bringing jobs to Illinois, but I think the premise of holding the state budget hostage until these things happen is not a productive way to move our state forward. Frankly, it's not governing, and I think continually staying in this cycle, putting politics before the policy is very dangerous, and we're seeing the impacts of it every day. All right, do I support a constitutional amendment to allow an independent entity to redraw the maps for congressional districts? Absolutely. This is an item on the governor's agenda, and he and I are in complete agreement on this. I have voted for one redistricting reform proposal so far this year. It does require a change in the Illinois Constitution, but I would support that. I do think we need to take politics out of the equation when drawing maps. I think competitive districts help by bringing new energy and an actual discussion of the issues instead of having as many safe districts. So that's something that I strongly support. The last topic for our prepared questions, or earlier submitted questions is on medical marijuana. So as you may know, and you may have seen around the city and otherwise, we now have legalized, there's a pilot program, I think it's a four-year pilot program to allow the dispensing of medical cannabis. I'm a strong supporter, frankly. If you're sick, if you're impacted by any of the many conditions that are permitted to receive medical cannabis, I'm all for the opportunity for you to get any and all medicine you need, whatever form it takes. There are a couple issues outstanding. I know we voted as a body to extend the program past the pilot phase for a couple reasons. A, I think it's a great idea to continue to allow people to have medical cannabis. It's the benefits so outweigh any detriment, and we want to continue to have companies invest in Illinois and produce and provide for dispensing and produce medical cannabis. And if we just provide for a temporary program, they're not going to be able to make that investment. The governor vetoed the last extension of the program. I'm not sure why, but I would support continuing the program, obviously. It's something that I've heard from so many constituents about and advocates, and it just takes one conversation with someone who's been impacted by the use of cannabis and has explained the positive changes in their lives as opposed to being on some very heavy opioids and prescription medications, and it's pretty easy to support. Finally, we would like to, and we've looked at bills to expand the number of conditions that are covered. I'm very open to this. I think, anyone with a serious illness or medical condition should have the right to, utilize medical cannabis. So I would support advancing those issues. So that is on the submitted questions. That's it. What? Let me check in with my technical consultant. No questions? No one submitted any questions, so. Yeah, well, I'm sorry that you haven't, but we have a lot of inquiries and emails in our inbox, so we'll go ahead and address many of the issues that you've reached out to us there. So for those of you who participated, and at this point I don't know if there's 5 of you or 500, but whoever's out there spending some time with us this evening, I appreciate it. But let me make a pitch to you as well. A lot of times I hear from constituents, and I need to support Bill 123 or Senate Bill 456 or whatever the issue might be, or thank me for my vote after, or maybe critique my vote after the vote's taken. But I want to emphasize to you how critical it is that you reach out to me ahead of time. Some issues I'm clear on, clearly issues pertaining to reproductive rights, for example. I think you know where I'm going to be on that. I'm always going to be supportive. But on many issues, I need and wish to hear from constituents to get your perspectives on issues and take that information. And it not only helps me make my decision initially, but it validates the decision or vote that I take, and I can then work with you or advocacy groups to talk to colleagues on a particular issue. So, it's interesting, the job of state representative, there really is no job description. You get elected, you get sworn in, and that's pretty much it. You have to figure the rest out. And I've always said, the title explains it all. My job is to be your representative in Springfield, to be your voice in Springfield on any number of issues. And so in order to do that, to the best of my ability, I need to hear from you. So please don't hesitate to reach out at any time. Thank you for participating tonight. Have a wonderful evening, and I will, depending on the feedback, be back with you either virtually or in reality sometime after session. So thank you so much. Have a good night.